been here a lot. Been up there in what's that old town, Keeler, something like that. Back in the 70s, and I just recently visited it a couple of years ago, or maybe a little bit more than that. Kind of looked the same, but it didn't look the same. And I'm sure you're real familiar with all the changes over the years. So it's just a fun place. I've been up and down 395 many times, being a backpacking enthusiast. And so this is a special place. Andrea is going to show us 3 different lakes. It will be really, really interesting if you've never seen them, or if you've seen them, anywhere between knowing nothing and kind of know where they are. This is a program for you. Next slide. Oh, by the way, I love that photo. It's my folder now.
And
So-
do you know if that is on this computer as well? So we
It is somewhere, yeah.
Is it in a folder?
Minimize this. There it is.
This and next, okay.
And this is after the presentations, we'll have questions. And then we've got one final slide for next month, but we can deal with that later. I'd much rather hear from Andrea and hear her program. So. And you can yell out, or is this on you?
Get this on Zoom so we can share this across to the Zoom audience.
Okay.
And get it on the recording. as
I'll
well.
let you take over from there before I blow anything up.
Copy it to that.
And
and then
pause
copy it to the
Okay.
computer.
There you go, this will stick onto that.
I'll let you guys.
Sure.
I don't want to put too many-
Yeah, we could turn the lights down. Oops. Okay. I just need the clicker. What happened to my little,
Watch out. I think it's right next to.
Oh, there it is.
there.
Do you remember the Wi-Fi password?
oh,
Like go fish, something like that.
Because we don't have her presentation on this computer to go into Zoom, so we have that, so
Yeah,
I've got it on
it's like
the camera.
fish.
Oh, good. Okay.
Ah, he's gonna get that one on Zoom.
Right?
In which case. Oh, stalling updates.
In 24 minutes.
Not close this window. Oh, dear.
we could transfer it if,
Maybe I haven't reached it's better shaped.
That's computer up.
Thank you for the preference.
Oh, we could talk, can I talk about the birds while we're waiting?
Yeah, we're figuring this out.
We, first of all, I was just looking at the current Hummin issue, and it talked about the slate threaded red star that's being seen up in San Francisco. And Eric and I went up to the San Francisco area for a friend's, actually a birding friend's 100th birthday party in August, and we ran up to San Francisco and saw the slate threaded red star, so that was fun. We had our a walk at Pebble Park last Sunday, and we got to see one of the bitterns. The female bittern came out very close to the dam, and we got very, very good looks at it. Also saw our first Say's Phoebe of the fall season. And at Kenneth Hahn Park, where we're gonna have a walk, basically it's the LA Audubon walk, but everyone's welcome to come to it on Saturday, this coming Saturday. And we've had a summer tanager there for the last, I think we first saw it on Friday. We went over today and sat for a little over an hour and didn't see it, so but hopefully it'll be hanging around and still be there on Saturday. We also saw our first white crowned sparrow of the fall season. So fall's coming. Oh, and Eric had a white winged dove in our bird bath, and we had on what I call the bath cam, which is a trail cam, we just have focused on our bird bath. We had a green-tailed towhee yesterday, which is the only, first one I've ever seen in our yard, and the second one we've seen in the Baldwin Hills. So
No, don't say.
things are moving around.
Do you want to try putting my presentation on this laptop?
Julian can join this one. 'Cause I think he's close.
Okay.
It looks like it wants to go. Letting the Zoom people see our phone, updating the Zoom windows.
Oh.
Up and running today. But I didn't
No, this
open
is,
up Zoom.
this is not, this is a different.
That's your computer, that's.
Can we,
Why was nobody?
Should I move my presentation onto here?
there?
It's on the Ann's flash drive. If there's a USB on here,
Is it on the same flash drive that I just?
The pink one.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
That. That should cover that. And
As long as there's a USB.
It isn't one thing, it's two levels.
It should be pretty obvious. It has my name on it.
not my, this PC, not my computer, so I don't know where anything is. Okay. Zoomers now.
It should say Jones on it.
It was on the and transfer flash drive.
Yeah. So I need my glasses or I won't be able to see anything.
It was on there. I saw it. It's the
Oh.
fifth one from the bottom.
That one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if you just transfer it to the desktop, so it's not running off the USB, it's probably better.
And does this computer have power?
That computer doesn't have much. It got ripped a few months ago.
So we may
Okay.
not be able to run it off of this because it's asked, well,
They didn't put.
let's see what happens if we open it with
So
Acrobat.
you guys can put all the stuff.
Connecting.
Oh,
I don't want to learn more.
Okay, we got it.
that's not my presentation.
Oh, you got this, yeah, this is,
You better hit okay over there.
I think we have to go back to the USB.
Yeah, say it, yeah.
It's okay.
so we're gonna go back to that.
Okay.
computer. Just watch your step.
Yeah.
Share from.
Yeah.
Yes. I need to make you. Co-host. probably be able to share.
Already shared.
Yeah, Ann's already sharing this, says.
Let me
Yeah. Stop sharing on that one.
stop sharing this one.
Okay.
And which computer is that? Do you have a name on that computer so I can let you share it? Julian, you know what that computer is?
There's-
So I can let you, or, oh, it looks like you share? Oh, good.
Yep. Then's my presentation.
Slideshow. PowerPoint slideshow.
Oh, you had to click the presentation.
No, stop that one.
Yes, stop share. And then hit share screen again. And pick the PowerPoint. Either one of those, I don't know why. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, close that. We'll make sure there's nothing covering it. That alert, close that.
Yeah, you can-
alert.
Close that. Okay.
There, that's starting to look better.
Okay, can I start?
I think so.
Oops. Make sure I can. Okay, go back to the beginning here. Okay, am I ready?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me come to this meeting. It ended up being perfect timing because I'm driving to San Diego tomorrow for our state board meeting. So I'm on the way. So a little bit, just a tiny bit about me. I've been with Audubon, California for 16 years. I have a master's degree in ornithology. I studied grasshopper sparrows for my thesis work. And I've been at Audubon my whole career, first at Mass Audubon and then in California. And I've been the conservation director for quite a while. And then about 6 weeks ago, I was asked to also be the interim state director because our state director left. So serving that role, I don't know if I'll be it in the long term yet, but I'm serving that role for now. But one of my passions, one of the things I've spent a lot of my career working on is saline lakes. So I'm always happy to talk to you about saline lakes. Figure out which button to press. Oh, the bottom one. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few of the saline lakes in California, mostly Owens Lake and Salton Sea, because that's where I've done most of my work. But the saline lakes are a really important part of the Pacific Flyway. They're sort of the interior flyway. You know, a lot of birds go along the coast. A lot of birds go through the Central Valley, but then a lot hopscotch through the saline lakes. And we've looked at banding records to realize how many birds use the saline lake system and how interconnected this is. And we produced a report in 2017 about birds in the arid West and how birds are using this declining and threatened resource across the Intermountain West. And places like Great Salt Lake are directly connected to the Salton Sea. And so again, the banding records showed us this matrix of how all these places are interconnected. And I'll just mention a few birds that are really interconnected across the Saline Lakes network. A large majority of the American white pelicans breed at Great Salt Lake, and the Salton Sea used to have about 45% of them wintering. So they're directly connected there, as well as, you know, birds coming down from the Klamath Lakes through the Central Valley, also ending up at the Salton Sea and the Sea of Cortez. Eared grebes have a really fascinating story. They breed in the mid-continent of the US in small pocket wetlands. And then almost the entire population go to saline lakes during their migration. So they either go to Mono Lake or Great Salt Lake for the most part. They molt and become completely flightless. They're there right now. And during that time, they gain a lot of fat by eating brine flies and brine shrimp. So they've evolved to make use of this nutritious food resource. They grow another set of flight feathers. After they've been there about a month, having a, you know, extended rest stop, then they continue on their journeys and they end up in the winter at places like the Salton Sea, coastal estuaries, and a lot go down into the Sea of Cortez. So we've documented about 5 million eared grebes going between Mono Lake and Great Salt Lake during migration. Does anyone know why they leave their breeding grounds up in Canada and why they do this? Does anyone have any ideas why they might do this weird? Exactly, it freezes. So because it freezes, just same thing like with loons, etc. They have to get out of those interior wetlands because they freeze, and they have discovered this food resource in the brine shrimp. So really fascinating journey, and a bird that's completely reliant on saline lakes for a large portion of its life cycle. Another one, I call these the, this is their lightly toasted marshmallow plumage, the American avocets. Aren't entirely reliant on saline lakes, but we think the majority of the population uses saline lakes during their migration or for breeding. We have thousands of them breeding at Owens Lake, Salton Sea, as well as interior wetlands across the West. But the more we look at avocets and their numbers are declining, the more we see that they're reliant on saline lakes as well as other systems in the West. So I just wanted to mention a little bit, you know, why these lakes, these saline lakes, you know, salty lakes that produce massive food resources for birds, why they're so threatened. Some of you probably know the story, but in Southern California, water comes from a few different sources. The LA aqueduct was built in 1918, and that carried water from basically from Mono Lake and the Owens River, the Owens Lake, down to grow the city of Los Angeles. So a large portion of water comes from, the blue is the LA aqueduct. So a large portion of water in Southern California comes from the Eastern Sierra. So we're relying on that snow melt that gets into the river and the lakes there and then carries the water down. And then we've got the aqueduct coming out of the rivers in more Northern California, which is another major resource. And then last but not least, we have the Colorado River, which is feeding both the Salton Sea and also some of the water in Southern California. So very complicated system of water coming from different regions to grow cities and provide resources for farming and for homes in Southern California. I won't talk today too much about Mono Lake, but as some of you are probably aware, that is the first saline lake that Audubon really worked on. And we started working there in the 1970s. Dan Taylor was our policy director, and I consider him a hero. And excuse me, Audubon took LA Department of Water and Power to the Supreme Court and sued them over Mono Lake, and because they were in the process of draining Mono Lake. The court suit was settled in 1996. And the reason we have a Mono Lake today is in large part because of Audubon. There were also other groups like Sierra Club that were engaged, but little known fact, or at least to me, when this process happened, Santa Monica Audubon helped found the Mono Lake Committee, which I had no idea. I discovered that in some literature. And that committee exists today, is very robust, and their role is to make sure LADWP doesn't do anything to mess up Mono Lake. So they do all the monitoring to make sure the brine shrimp and all the birds are still there, and you get the right salinity levels and whatnot. So it's a very complicated court case that I won't go into, but it's used in a lot of natural resource law classes because of how Audubon won the case to save Mono Lake. Later, and this is where I came more into play, was with Owens Lake and Salton Sea, and I'll describe those in more detail. So Grinnell, who was a researcher out of UC Berkeley in the late 1800s, early 1900s, wrote about Owens Lake, and this is what Owens Lake used to look like. It was full of water, and he had accounts of grebes and avocets shore to shore all the way along Owens Lake, which was a 100-square-mile terminal lake of the Owens River. So that's why it's salty. It's a terminal lake, meaning it has no inlet and outlet. It's in a very hot area, and so the water concentrates, the salts build up, and you get these, again, brine flies and brine shrimp like you have at Mono Lake. And this is what it looks like today. And so in between that picture and this picture, LA Department of Water and Power drained the entire lake. So they drained 100 square miles. It was drained by 1918, again, to put in the aqueduct. They put the entire thing in the aqueduct and send it to Los Angeles. And so this is a picture of people in LA receiving the water, and William Mulholland, who was, I forget what his role was, mayor, or I forget what does someone remember? Yeah.
I think the city of LA.
I think he worked for the city. Yeah, he worked for LA Department of Water and Power, and he was responsible for building this 200+ mile aqueduct through the Eastern Sierra down into Los Angeles. Basically,
Familiar with his speech?
yes, he said, "There it is, take it." And so that's what he said when all the crowds were gathering, and it led to the building of the city of Los Angeles. He swindled a lot of farmers in the Eastern Sierra out of their land. He had his staff go up and pretend to be farmers. And so they dressed in farming outfits and offered them high prices for their land. And they thought, well, I'll sell it to another farmer. It turns out they were LA city officials, and they bought 250, 300,000 acres of land. So the mixed metaphor here is LA Department of Water and Power still owns most of the Eastern Sierra Valley. And in its weird way, even though they did this, it's sort of protected. If you drive up 395 in the Eastern Sierra, you see these cute little old towns that have barely changed, and all the land in between can't be developed. it's all protected land by LA Department of Water and Power. I'm sure that would have been more developed under different circumstances, but then on the other end of the spectrum, they did do a lot of environmental damage, but we're working on trying to fix that. So once the lake was completely drained, over time, less rainwater became available. And by the 80s and 90s, massive dust clouds were coming off the lake. And it was showing this fine particulate air pollution that you see in a lot in asthma. It's got arsenic in it and all kinds of chemicals. And it's called the PM10, fine particulate pollution, that really lodges in your lungs. And it was one of the worst cases of PM10 air pollution in the United States was coming off of Owens Lake. It's an incredibly windy area, especially in the fall. And so these massive dust clouds would travel hundreds of miles up and down the valley, all the way down towards Los Angeles, and create these big dust clouds. But the city was sued by the Great Basin Air Pollution Control District, and court ordered to start putting water back in the lake. This is when Audubon came onto the scene. In the around 2008, I started working with the local chapter because the city did start to water the lake, but they weren't thinking about birds. They were just thinking about, what do we need to do to stop the dust as quickly as possible? They were using water in some cases because water is the easiest way to control dust. If you have a dusty driveway, you put water on it. But they also started using gravel and looking at soil binders and all kinds of things that wouldn't have created good bird habitat. But we knew from the local birders in the area that there were still birds just around the edge of the lake where there were these remnant wetlands. And our idea was, let's work with the city on, minimizing how much water they have to put out there, but maximizing it for birds, because there were birds still there. And so we did that, and we negotiated. I personally went up to the top floor of the LADWP building in downtown Los Angeles and met with the general manager. And I thought, how did I get in this place working with, the water lords? But we did it. We managed to convince the city to change what they were doing and focus on protecting Owens Lake for birds while minimizing how much water they had to put out there. And just as an example, they made these big levees and just started pouring water in. And most of the ducks and the shorebirds like shallow water. And so they did a lot of dabbling ducks. So we said, these deep pools aren't doing anything. You want shallower water to maximize bird use. And they love that because they're like, okay, that's less water. And so it sort of became a win-win. And so these were my partners in crime. These were two volunteers. Pete is a retired environmental lawyer. So he had the teeth behind our arguments. And then we had Mike on the other side, a retired school teacher, spent his entire career teaching in the deserts of California. He was the birder. He knew what every bird was out there. So the three of us together got all the agencies involved and managed to come up with this deal that we struck by about 2015. It took a long time and a lot of tears along the way. But this is what in 2000, before we started, this is on the left, what Owens Lake looked like. Nothing left, just a few green patches, excuse me. And then by the time we were done, on the right, that's all green cells that were full of water and full of birds. This area in the middle is the brine pool, which is why it's pink, and that's where the salts really concentrate. And there's a mine there. It's not a good spot for birds, but this is 45,000 acres of habitat for birds. So this is what we saw. You add water and the brine flies come back, and then the yellow legs come in, and we just saw these massive concentrations of birds. One day we captured 45,000 shorebirds coming in. Fresh off migration, mostly least some western sandpipers, some dunlin in there, but just every year we went out and counted, we saw more and more birds as DWP changed their practices and made it more appropriate for birds. We didn't do this alone. We worked with the tribes, we worked with the Sierra Club. There was a whole coalition of us working together. And this is the final product was called the Master Project. It's still enacted today. DWP, they've actually just started putting their annual water out on the lake now because they do it to coincide with bird migration. So they're putting water out as the shorebirds are migrating through, and that was part of our agreement. And so we have this book that they put together. It's amazing that these people in Los Angeles agreed to even put a bird on the cover of something. And they made, if you flip through the pages, it's all about different kinds of habitats they're protecting at Owens Lake for the birds. They have biologists on staff that monitor the snowy plover nests. I mean, they've really done a good job with this. So that's my Owens Lake story. There's a much longer story, but I don't want to keep you here all night. And I wanted to switch to the Salton Sea, and then I'll open it for questions at the end. So as I was wrapping up the work at Owens Lake, I thought, you know, this was super successful. It was hard. What can I do next? And I told Dan Taylor, who had helped save Mono Lake, I want to go work at the Salton Sea. And he said, you're crazy. Don't do it. No one succeeds there. And meanwhile, we started to get rumblings in about 2015 that all the nonprofits and all the agencies were starting to come together, and I'll tell you why in a minute, to try and save Salton Sea. So we jumped in feet first and haven't slowed down on our work at the Salton Sea. So now today we have a huge team working at the Salton Sea. Mike's running things from the Sacramento lens. Camila and Ryan both grew up in Coachella Valley, grew up at the sea. So they're part of our team. And then we have Dan Orr doing the science work out of our Sacramento office. And I do a lot of the science work as well. A lot of people have said to me, why do you even care about the Salton Sea? It was an accident. You've probably heard that before. And I say, I don't care if it was an accident because it's full of birds. And whether you consider it an accident or not, it actually came online just in time. So instead of thinking of an accident, it was sort of a sanctuary that the birds needed when they were losing wetlands across the rest of California. So if you look on this map on the left, we lost most of the wetlands in the Central Valley. Mono Lake was shrinking. Owens Lake completely disappeared. And these are square miles. Tulare Lake was gone. Well, until 2 years ago, you've probably heard in the news, it came back a little bit. But Tulare Lake was gone. And this was all in the early 1900s. And exactly the same time, Salton Sea appeared on the scene. So these birds, which probably evolved to move around the landscape as water becomes available, and, you know, a water depleted landscape like California, where, you know, you have good years and bad years, all we can think is these birds learn to move around. So they found the Salton Sea. And I'll tell you how it was created. So in 1905, prospectors discovered this area down here, which is really nice agricultural soils. It's an outlet of the Colorado River. It's one of the places the Colorado River goes at its end. The Colorado River either goes north into the Salton Sink or it goes into the Sea of Cortez. So you have really rich soil there. So some farmers decided, let's grow a massive agricultural economy in the Salton Sink. Let's start building pipes and aqueducts. So they started building from the Colorado River here, and here's where the Colorado River ends down in the Gulf. They started building pipes and sending water up through the Alamo River and the New River up towards the Salton Sink. Then there was a massive storm in, I think it was 1902 or 1903, and it just didn't stop raining. So they were partway done building these channels and they broke. So the water just started flooding. Today, you could probably stop it quicker. They didn't have the technology then to stop the water. So the water just kept going from the Colorado River down these canals for 2 years and created a 350-mile square lake. So massive lake, biggest lake in California now, was created by an attempt to create farms in the what was called is called the Imperial Valley, and flooded the Salton Sea. We do know from talking to tribes in the region and from looking at records that there were previous versions of the Salton Sea on heavy wet years when the Colorado River would make its way there. So there were wetlands, there were small seas. Originally, there was an ancient Lake Cotuia, which goes back, more to ancient times, but there is a history of there being some water in the region in the last 200 years, but nothing as big as this. And it was all created by quote unquote accident. But the reason we also say it's not an accident, because to farm this region, there's so many salts there that you have to constantly flush water through them, through the soil in order to grow things there. So you would need an agricultural sump. So they were going to create the Salton Sea at some point anyway, because they needed somewhere to put the water that they flow through the agricultural fields. So to this day, all the farmers down there pour water through their fields and dump about a third of it into the Salton Sea. So that's still happening. But this was the flood. Railroads broke, old grain storage facilities became surrounded by water. It took out towns, did a lot of damage. But then it became, then it had its heyday. The Frank Sinatra years, when the Palm Desert was growing, there were regattas, there was a yacht club, there was hot springs, there was fishing, there was ski boats. It was a retreat for the rich and famous in the hot desert south of Los Angeles. So it really had its heyday for a while until, and at that same time, birds really showed up. So white pelicans started nesting there, brown pelicans started nesting there, birds were everywhere. Eventually, this sort of tourism disappeared because the sea became kind of stinky, and it lost its appeal. And so there's still a yacht club there today, but if you've driven around the sea, you can see these weird remnants of old motels and the original yacht club, but there's not much of that left. So today, it's the largest lake in California, not the deepest, but the largest. One of the most important bodies for inland water bodies for migratory birds. You have Lake Tahoe, but it's so deep, you don't really have that rich environment. It's very shallow, no more than 20 feet, but it creates a lot, because it's saline. There's a lot of insects, a lot of invertebrates. There's a pupfish that's native to the region. So a lot of food resources for birds. And like Owens Lake and Mono Lake, it's a terminal lake, meaning it's the end of a bunch of rivers, the White River to the north and the New River and the Alamo River to the south. So there is some natural flow of water going in, but most of it is fed by the agricultural industry. So I told you it's not really an accident. What happens there affects 650,000 people that live in the region. There's 8 tribes in the region that we work with. The sea is now shrinking, and I'll explain why in a moment. About 40% in the 90s, the Metropolitan Water District was eyeing how much Colorado River water was going to Imperial Valley and into the Salton Sea, and asked for 40% of that water. And that deal was to be struck in 2017. State of California said yes, and because we're taking water out of the Salton Sea, we'll figure out what to do about the Salton Sea in the process. Well, guess what? They never figured out what to do about the Salton Sea, but 2017 hit and water started to be taken away out of the system to grow more homes in Southern California. With that happening, same thing as Owens Lake, the sea's shrinking and you're getting dust around the edges that are affecting one of the poorest, not one of the poorest region in California, and a lot of asthma issues. Many of the birds can't tolerate the conditions there anymore because it's getting saltier. So we've seen a change in bird populations. The state is finally starting to figure out how to fix the sea. This number's changed since we wrote this. Over $400 million is being, we have more than that used to try and fix the sea. But we need to do something to maintain it because there aren't many other wetlands. So this is a bit complicated. I won't go into all the details, but basically water comes from the Colorado River, goes to the Imperial Irrigation District, and then into the Imperial Valley agriculture, and about a third of it ends up in the sea as runoff. And so that shrunk by 35 to 40% in 2018. So that's when Audubon started ramping up because we saw bird populations start to change big time. So this is what's happening. You see the sea receding, especially on the south end, and this massive area of exposed playa is where we're starting to see dust clouds. This is sounding very bleak, but I do have good news in here, so hang on. It gets better. But by 2047, they're predicting over 75,000 acres of exposed playa. That's the size of Owens Lake. And we're already seeing major health problems for people in the region. And the rising salinity level, once you get past about 70 parts per thousand in salinity, you start to lose the last remaining fish. It was a tilapia, which is not native, it's from the Middle East, but it was providing good food resource for birds. The tilapia is basically gone. We still have pupfish. They're fine in the high salinity, but they're tiny and there aren't a ton of them. And there's a few mosquito fish, there's a few other things, but we've seen a big change when the tilapia disappeared about 2020. And so this is what we were facing when we would go down there and do bird surveys. We're like, wait, that was the boat dock, and now the water's out there. And so you start to see weird things like this happening where things are moving further and further away from you. And it's getting harder and harder to access the sea. And this will stabilize at some point, because as I said, the agreement was to allow 40% to be removed. So that's still happening, and it will stabilize at some point. But wanted to show you this. This is an island up here, and if you keep looking at it, it was filled with 5,000 cormorant nests, double-crested cormorants. And you can see the first few years it's an island, and then as the sea recedes, it becomes completely connected. And here it's about to get connected. So the coyotes got out there. I went out to the island. Farmer took me out. Those are cormorant nests, and they're all abandoned. There's like 5,000 of them. And so they were losing their nests, and there's not a lot of fish left for them to eat. So that was a really eye-opening experience when I witnessed that. Oops, wrong direction. So how's Audubon working to fix this? And we're working, again, like Owens Lake, we're not doing this alone. We're working with a lot of partners in the region. We're working with local community-based organizations. There are no Audubon chapters down there, unfortunately, but we're working with colleges. We're working with Sierra Club, and we're working with Defenders of Wildlife. We're working with some of the tribes, particularly the Torres Martinez tribes that is right on the shores of the sea. And we're bringing all that Audubon brings to a project. We're doing science. We're looking at a restoration project. We're working with the community to empower the local community to have a voice to save the sea. And we're doing local, state, and federal policy to bring laws and resources to the area. So one of the projects I'm most proud of that I didn't run, but our staff down there, Frank Ruiz, who was our program director, ran, was he started a program in the high school, bringing 20 to 30 high school students for the entire school year down to the Salton Sea. Most of them live in Coachella Valley and had never seen the sea. And they got there and they're like, I never thought I wanted to come. I just heard it was dead and stinky. And they get there and they say, it's actually really beautiful. And we taught them how to take water quality measurements, how to do bird surveys, gave them job training skills in case they want to go into an environmental career. We created some internships so we could pay some of the students. And we've just created a wealth of data that no one else is collecting. The state isn't even collecting this data. Like, we're the ones down there monitoring the populations, and it's because of these students. We also were on our 7th year of doing bird surveys again. And this is Liliana Griego. She actually lives up here more, but she likes to go down to the Salton Sea with me to help count shorebirds. So since 2017, every 3 months, we do a full survey of sites around the Salton Sea. And so we've been able to track how the bird populations are changing over time. And now the state agency that's supposed to be responsible for the sea is like, hey, Audubon, how are the birds doing? And we have the data to show them. We bring in volunteers. We have some chapters come. We've had Pasadena Audubon come down, Sea and Sage Audubon. You guys are welcome to help us do these surveys. I wouldn't recommend the August survey, which I've done, and it's 110 degrees. It doesn't cool down in the morning, so you start it's like 95. But the winter surveys are quite pleasant, and there's a lot of birds to see. So just a little snapshot. We've got tons of data. We're looking at invertebrates. We're looking at water quality. What are the birds eating? But I just wanted to mention what we're calling winners and losers. So since we started our surveys in 2017, we've seen a major jump in avocets, least and west sandpipers, and northern shovelers. Northern shovelers eat, they're in shallow water eating algae and, dabbling along the surface. And it's amazing. I go out there and I'll just see thousands flying in for the winter. And least and western sandpipers are doing incredibly well there. In last August, one of those hot, horrible days there, we counted 240,000 small shorebirds around the sea. That actually beats Great Salt, it beats all the other lakes. So we have this little competition to see which lake has more shorebirds, and we beat them all with the number of shorebirds at the Salton Sea. And we discovered that they're eating the substance called biofilm. And I had a student from UCLA help me study this, and it's like a bacterial algae soup made up of diatoms and microinvertebrates. And least and western sandpipers' tongues have evolved to slurp up this substance. We call it shorebird smoothies. And they're the only shorebirds that really eat biofilm. It's becoming known in the literature from estuaries because it forms where saltwater and freshwater meet. And so we know shorebirds in estuaries, big estuaries like Puget Sound and San Francisco Bay, we know they feed on the substance called biofilm. So we're like, why are we getting so many of these shorebirds at the Salton Sea? Maybe they have biofilm too. So we took lab samples, sent them off to a lab, and they said, you have biofilm. And no one's ever known biofilm to occur at a saline lake before. But we found it where salt water and this agricultural flow, fresh water, come together. And it kind of explains why we're seeing this massive jump in birds. I still wonder how the birds figured it out. How did they, change their migratory routes to really take advantage of this? But they did. And at the same time, we've got some losers. The American white pelicans have all but disappeared. The cormorants are gone, and the eared grebes are kind of a weird one. When we started doing the surveys, it went at one point in the 90s, they counted 2 million eared grebes at the Salton Sea. Then we started and we counted 240 eared grebes. I'm like, that's a massive difference. And it was because the one invertebrate they were eating, water boatman, disappeared. But then a couple years later, one of our volunteers, Bob McKernan, I don't know if you guys know that name in the birding community, he decided to take a plane out and do a transect a few years ago and started to see hundreds of thousands of eared grebes. So they've come back and they're feeding on another invertebrate at the sea. They're not coming back in the millions, but they're coming back. And so it's been interesting studying the birds there because things happen that you can't even predict. So we don't know what the end story is for eared grebes, but at least we've got a good number of them at the sea right now. And again, so California Department of Fish and Wildlife did surveys from 2008 to 2018 for fish-eating birds, and you can see they basically disappeared. So it's just another data source showing pelicans, cormorants, and tern species have mostly disappeared from the sea. So what are we doing? Dan Cooper took this picture, a colleague of mine, and I love this picture because it's like the who's who of water birds. There's a little bit of everyone in here. And so we're working with a state right now who is doing a massive restoration project, and that will be my good news piece in a moment, and encouraging them, you need to bring this back. You need shallow water transitioning to deeper water, so you can get everything from the little shorebirds that like the biofilm all the way to the pelicans that want the fish. And so we've been using this picture a lot in presentations to showcase what the sea could look like once we start building habitats again out there. So I just want to run you through a few of the different habitat types and birds, and then I'll tell you what the restoration plan is for the sea. So we've got these freshwater wetlands with these deep ponds, and these have traditionally been used particularly by pelicans. We've got more of these sort of vegetated wetlands around the sea, and those are still there, and those host a lot of different duck species, ruddy ducks, things like that. In the Imperial Valley to the south, huge numbers of cattle egrets. Almost the entire state population of burrowing owls is at the Salton Sea, on the south end of the Salton Sea. So about 80% of California's burrowing owls breed in the Imperial Valley. And by the way, burrowing owl has been proposed for state listing. And so we're looking at that right now because they have disappeared from most of the rest of the state.
There's a lot fewer at the Salton Sea than there were 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, we think they're declining there too. And you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, especially an agricultural basket. You know, it's probably not the healthiest place. They're feeding in the agricultural fields. So we're hoping they get state listed and get more protections. Snow geese, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service still manages the Sunny Bono Refuge. I think, wasn't someone here wearing a Sunny Bono Refuge t-shirt? Great place to see snow geese. They still manage their fields down there for snow geese and cranes. And Imperial Irrigation District has created thousands of acres of these wetlands that attract ridgeways, rails, least bitterns, just incredible. And those are still all doing really well. They're obligated to keep these freshwater wetlands going. Tons of birds in there. And then where we see birds are wherever there's fresh water. Sometimes this one's more natural. Sometimes it's a pipe where fresh water's coming in. Sometimes it's a desert wash. And you can see in the background here, those are all birds, mostly ducks probably. But it's where these freshwater pulses come in the sea that the birds concentrate. And then this muddy area, this is an example of what we would consider as probably biofilm. Not a great picture, just took it a couple years ago, but all the little dots in here are shorebirds. And so this is on the south end of the sea near the refuge. And this sort of wetted, muddy habitat is where you see these shorebirds feeding. And there's still some fish and game ponds that create breeding habitat for black skimmers. They're still hanging on, as well as we get some Caspian terns and some gull-billed terns breeding there. I've already mentioned the eared grebe. And a big winner is the snowy plover. We also counted, what was it, 400 snowy plovers this year at the Salton Sea. So one of the, outside of Great Salt Lake, it's the biggest interior breeding population. These birds are considered separate from the coastal birds, but we actually found a bird this year, one of our volunteers did, that was banded, breeding there, and it was banded at Camp Pendleton. So shh, don't tell anyone that some of the, at least one coastal bird went to the interior, because the interior birds are not federally listed, the coastal ones are. So maybe a tiny bit of mixing, but we don't think there's much mixing. But it was exciting to know where this bird was born. It was 3 years old, and the volunteer did find a nest with chicks. So we know that it was successful. And then I love this picture because there's an art community along the shores of the sea called Bombay Beach, and they made this lemonade stand. And what's the expression? When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. And so this is the lemonade. As the sea has receded, all of these drains that used to go directly into the sea are now dumping onto the playa and have created what we're calling these accidental wetlands. So we did an aerial survey. This is the north end of the sea. This is Torres Martinez property. Everywhere that's green is a wetland. And these were all underwater 5 years ago. And so these wetlands are filled with birds. They're also controlling dust. So we're working with the state right now to try and get the state to maintain these wetlands so they don't disappear, because the fresh water is still there and they've become these havens for birds. So we decided, in order to prove to the state how important they were, we would take on one of these wetland projects ourselves and prove that they're important for birds in the flyway, and also talk about why they're threatened. If the state doesn't manage them, these flows could disappear, or it could be related to groundwater. And so we took a wetland that we found near the Bombay Beach. We did an aerial survey. Actually, one of my contractors was up in a plane. No, it was a drone. And he's like, Andrea, you won't believe what we found. There's a 900-acre wetland. And its source is fresh water from the mountains. And so it's not even agricultural water. But you couldn't, everything's so flat out there, you couldn't really see how big it was, but it's massive. And so we took on this project to try and maintain this wetland and figure out how to save it over time, because we saw ducks, pintails, harriers, you name it, flying in and out of this massive wetland. So this is the area that it's located, sort of on the southeast side of the sea. And our project goals here are stabilize the habitat. How do we make sure this wetland, which is so beautiful right now, is still here in 10 years? We want to expand it. There's fresh water coming out of the mountains. Can we push it out onto more of the dry playa to make the wetland even bigger? We want to create trails and kiosks and shade structures for the local community. And anything you do out there with water and vegetation controls dust. So it's sort of a multi-benefit project. Oh, I wasn't ready to go there yet. So we've almost finished the design for this project, and the state is planning to, they've got the funding and they're planning to do a big construction project in our wetland next year. And we're really excited about it. We'll end up with trails and probably a 1,200-acre wetland on that side of the Salton Sea. So stay tuned for that. And then, if you haven't heard, I took this picture in one of these abandoned areas, new city coming soon. So on the south end of the Salton Sea, it's all this bubbling geothermal, and there's geothermal plants, and there's been a massive discovery of lithium, one of the biggest lithium deposits anywhere. Most lithium is mined. It's mined in Australia, Chile. There's a mine in Nevada. It's very destructive. Lithium, as you probably know, is needed for batteries, particularly all these new electric vehicles. The lithium at the Salton Sea is different. It doesn't require a mine. They found it in the brine that's being circulated in the geothermal plants. Geothermal is a good source of energy, and they can extract the lithium out of the water that's sort of in a closed loop. And so they're in the process of experimenting on extracting the lithium. If this works, it could be a major game changer for the region in terms of the economy, providing jobs. And so as companies have come in and got permits, again, this is where our policy shop is important. We negotiated to make sure a large percentage of the money, the profits out of lithium stay in the local community and provide for the people in the region that are incredibly poor. And they agreed to that, as well as to mitigate any habitat that might be lost in the process. The geothermal plants are small, they don't take up a big footprint, but they will, if they build more geothermal plants, they will destroy a few wetlands, so they have to mitigate for that. So we've been in a lot of negotiations on this. So what does the sea look like today? The good news is the state, after years of inaction and delay, is working very fast. In fact, one of our former Audubon staff, I'm very proud of this, is now running the Salton Sea program for the state. So it also means we have a friendly voice to talk to. But all these bright green areas are projects that the state's building on the dry playa. The biggest one is SCH, which stands for Species Conservation Habitat, is 5,000 acres going on, soon to be 6,000 acres. It's going to be massive in terms of habitat. They're building ponds in there. They're building deeper ponds. They're actually going to stock them with fish. They want to bring back the white pelican. So they're going to create habitat for pelicans as well as habitat for shorebirds. So this is what it looks like now. This is our team getting a tour, and this is one of the big weirs they're building. They're taking water from the interior of the Salton Sea, mixing it with water coming in from the rivers to create like low salinity water. And in 3 weeks, I'm going down there for the groundbreaking when they're going to start flooding. I can't wait to see 5,000 acres full of water. And it's,
And at the southern unit.
yes, it's at the very southern end of the sea on the southwest side. I can go back.
There's a Sunny Bono site down there as well.
Yeah,
Unit 1.
Sunny Bono is here.
Well, but there's a second.
Oh, you're right. There's
secondary
a
one
second
down.
one down here. So it's very close to that.
Okay.
I think there is a bit of federal ownership in here. IID owns a bunch of, it's a mixed ownership pattern, but the refuge has been very involved. Yeah, it's 5,000 acres. It's going to be huge. And there's some observation platforms, not a lot of public access, unfortunately, which is why our Bombay Beach project, which is on the map, is going to have a lot of public access features like trails. So anyway, this was, I think, last year. And again, the project's going online in just a few weeks. So hopefully the birds come back. So Frank Ruiz, who is sort of behind this image, wrote this, and we learned a lot from him. We hired him. He has lived most of his life in the community. He's a pastor. He's a psychologist and then an environmentalist. And he talks about, as Audubon, we can't just talk about the birds at the Salton Sea. We have to talk about the people in the region. Both go hand in hand because we have to fix the issues for the local communities down there and all of the medical issues they're having. And seeing something like this 5,000 acre wetland about to go online, where it's incredibly dusty, like deep silty sand, seeing that go online soon is going to really change things in the region. So what can you all do? Go birding at the Salton Sea. We have bird surveys every 3 months, or just go birding by yourselves. We pull a ton of data from eBird, and we use that in our analysis to learn about how birds are doing at the sea. So eBird is really helpful for us. Write articles in your local newsletter. as we put out action alerts, support those, attend chapter advocacy events. I don't know when the next one is. This is Frank on the Torres Martinez property. But most of all, I wanted to just in my last few minutes, we also have a birding trail map on our webpage, and you can, we formatted it so you can do it on your phone as well. And it shows you all the good places to go birding as well as places to get food. Because there's not, and restrooms, because those are few and far between down there. So we do have a birding trail map online. We've never really printed it, but it's accessible on our website. And then I just want to take 3 minutes before questions and just mention Prop 4, which is going to be on the November ballot. And Audubon is one of the sponsors of the ballot, National Audubon Society. And we had a call today. Some chapters were able to join on how chapters should join in on the ballot. It's called the Climate Bond, and it's going to bring in $10 billion for communities and environmental, including another huge chunk of money for the Salton Sea, as well as San Francisco Bay and the coastline and everywhere in between. But there's a specific earmark in there for the Salton Sea. So won't go through all the details, but there's a lot of different pots of money in the bond. Where polling is showing a 60% interest right now. We're hopeful it will pass. We hope you will share it in your communities. And here's what it's going to do for the Salton Sea. It's going to create 14,000 more acres of habitat, and provide the critical refuges for wildlife that we've talked about. Parks and outdoor access is really important to Audubon. As you know, 700 million will be creating new parks in underserved communities. So this is some of the things that are going to come out of the climate bond. Just a few more things that we'll do. San Francisco Bay, rivers, lakes, wetlands. Most of the bonds, monies on previous bonds is all gone. The sort of environmental agencies are completely out of money. In fact, some of them have signs on their website, don't even ask us for money right now, we're out of money, like wildlife conservation boards. So they need this to keep going. So if you're interested in getting involved, reach out to us. I can put you, or reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with our communications team. We're going to have stickers and t-shirts and materials, social media toolkits, things you can put on your website, on your Facebook page. We're trying to send a positive message around the bond, around why this is a good thing. And yeah, we hope you guys will help support that. Just and we're also promoting Get Out the Vote. We as Audubon cannot and will not endorse or mention political candidates, but we can encourage people to vote. And so you'll also see coming from National Audubon right now, I Bird, I Vote campaign, just encouraging people to get out and vote. And that's the end of my presentation. I smushed a lot in there. Okay.
Coming from my former career in the wastewater industry, is there any discussion of utilizing recycled wastewater there?
That's a great question. I mean, in a sense, a lot of the water going into the Salton Sea is wastewater, because it's coming out of the, in a different context. Yeah.
And stuff like that.
I don't know. That's a really good question. It would probably be most applicable in Coachella Valley, where you have more of the population. But I don't know. It's a really good question, because, and it's, you know, there's a lot of golf courses up in the Palm Desert.
There's pretty.
And there's some are
aggressive
using
efforts to recycle.
recycle, yeah.
In the Palm Springs
Yep.
area, but you've got a poor population there, and I don't know what they're doing with their wastewater there, but it can be cleaned.
Yeah.
And there's always a need to, where are we gonna put this stuff? For the large part, along the coast of California, it all goes to the ocean. So in LA County,
Can you speak to the microphone?
oh, in LA County,
That's it.
where is it? Where is it? I'll just stand next to you. In LA County and Orange County, 1 billion gallons of water is treated every day.
Wow.
I mean, it's just massive. The Hyperion treatment plant discharges 260 million gallons a day. LA County sanitation is about the same. Orange County sand is about 160 instead of 260.
Hear what you say, Ann.
Okay. Anyway, there's a lot of water
That can
that's
be
being
reused, yeah.
viewed as just wastewater. They clean it up to meet standards for the input water. So a lot of the major agencies discharge it very, very deep. Or if you consider 60 meters depth, very, very deep, that's like 200 feet. I know the city of LA has plans to move their water treatment and not discharging it into the ocean. I consider those outfalls gerrymandered rivers.
Yeah,
They started up in
Yeah.
the Sierras. And
yeah, LADWP's looking a lot at both water storage and water
right,
recycling.
yeah,
But I think you're completely right. We had 2 good wet winters. That doesn't mean we're gonna have one this year. We don't
Exactly.
know. So we may be going back into a situation again of needing more water. So we'll see. Does anyone have any questions?
Question. It's a very selfish question because I want to get back to Owens Lake and I'm actually driving up to Mono Lake on Sunday.
Oh,
And you were saying that the city is now filling Owens Lake with water again.
yep.
So how far into that are they? Is it trickling or is it worth a stop to explore that for a couple of hours?
Yes, it is worth
Can
us.
you repeat the
Oh,
question?
yeah.
Online, they said they can't hear.
I'll repeat the question. She's asking if it's worth stopping at Owens Lake right now to see some birds and where they are at in the process of rewatering Owens Lake for their annual cycle. Yes, Mike Prather just let me know a few days ago, there's a lot of shorebirds there right now. There's big sprinklers. If you go look online, there's actually a nice trail on the east side of Owens Lake. Or you can pull off at Cartago Springs on the south. There's a few places you can go around Owens Lake where DWP has actually built some trails.
So don't go in through the visitor center.
You could go to the visitor center and ask them how to get to some birding spots.
Okay.
It's not the easiest place to navigate, but there are a few places that are now accessible with some nice walking paths.
Should one go off 395 at the south end?
Best to go to the north end off of 395. There's a visitor center, and then you start driving east from there. And because more of the birds are on the east side of Owens Lake, the side, you'll see a lot of water along the highway. That's mostly the brine pool. It's still flooded because there's still excess water from 2 good years, but most of the birds you'll see on the east side.
And there's access on the east.
Yes, there's access on the east side. Just don't drive off the levees. I've seen that happen.
Expensive risk.
Yeah, just be careful driving out there, but it's open to the public.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
Good question, Andrea, and great presentation, and thanks for all your fantastic efforts in saving.
Thank you.
Our saline waterways. I can't wrap my head around though, even if we, on these terminal lakes, even if we reduce the outflows and maintain the overall volume, how do you combat just infinite increasing salinity? Because you still got the evaporative losses and, it just seems like, unless you're continuing to grow the volume of the lake, the salinity is always going to be increasing.
Yeah, so the question is around, how do you deal with the increasing salinity? The way to deal with that, it's still being figured out at the Salton Sea, is they're going to, as the sea keeps shrinking, create a brine pool like they have at Owens Lake, which will be hypersaline. And then as they create these wetlands, mix it with water that's still coming in from the river. We don't need fresh water. Birds actually prefer like lightly saline water because it creates the invertebrates. So you have to think of it not like a sea anymore, but an area which will be a brine sink where the super salty water will be, and then these medium salty freshwater wetlands where you'll mix some of that water with water coming up from the rivers and pour that out on the playa. At Owens Lake, part of the compromise was they did put gravel on one part of the lake where it was super dusty because there just wasn't enough water to go around of the fresher water. So we gave up a piece of the lake in order to create habitat on the rest of it. I don't think that will happen at the Salton Sea because there's still 800,000 acre feet of water to move around. And then also if you create more of these wetlands with shallow water, your water can go a lot further instead of the deeper water that's there now. So you'll see more of those shallower types of water to have. And if you go to Owens Lake, as like you'll see the sprinklers out there, just, you know, just wetting the surface, and the birds and the gulls love that. Jess.
The lithium that's being generated, this is all from underground water.
Yes.
What would be the effect on the birds of the lithium if it presumably won't be 100% removal? Is that going to present any sort of a health problem? What lithium should be fairly reactive, so.
The question is whether there'll be any detrimental impacts to the birds from the lithium processing. There will be some, I don't know a ton about the lithium, to be honest, but there will be some wastewater areas that the plants create. Most of it will be in a closed loop, but there will be some wastewater created. And that's part of what they're experimenting with right now, because we want to make sure two things: that any wastewater that's created doesn't get into the groundwater and damage drinking water supplies, and doesn't harm birds. And so that is part of what's being studied right now. And there's very, you know, being the state of California with our great environmental laws, there's a lot of studies going into, and a lot of the local community groups are really speaking out to make sure that where the lithium is happening doesn't impact groundwater. So it is a concern of ours, and that's something that is being investigated.
Yeah, I was wondering if any problems are being generated from insecticides and fertilizers coming from the Imperial Valley in Salton Sea, and what can be done about that?
That's a great question. The question is whether the insecticides and pesticides in Imperial Valley are impacting the Salton Sea.
And fertilizer.
And fertilizers. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going into the Salton Sea, and whenever we ask the state or the water resource agencies about the water quality in the sea, they say it gets diluted enough that it's okay. It's not a satisfying response, but you know, we're studying some aspects of it. We're seeing a lot of invertebrates. The pupfish populations are healthy, but we're not. There's a UC Riverside is doing a very detailed study right now on what contaminants are on the north end of the lake that could be impacting the Coachella Valley area. We don't have the results yet, but the state keeps telling us, oh, it's fine, it's all diluted, but it's hard to know.
In your water, right?
Yeah, it's a terminal lake. Yeah, it's yeah, I don't really have a very good answer for that, but there is as I said, a professor that's studying it right now, and hopefully we'll be able to get us some answers soon.
There's a well-known ditty in the wastewater industry. The solution to pollution is dilution.
That's a good point. And that's sort of the argument that's used, but as less water becomes available, it is going to concentrate more, and that is something we need to be looking at.
I have a question. So the flood 100 years ago. That took out that whole canal system.
Mhm.
that wanted to live. If that amount of rainfall happened again, do they have the wherewithal to switch? Kind of switch the water over to the Colorado River enough and not keep it from destroying the infrastructure that's going in?
It's a great question. The question is whether we have the infrastructure in place to prevent a big flood like happened in 1903 or whatever the exact year was. And yes, because we've got a series of dams, you know, the Hoover Dam, we've got water stored at Lake Mead. So we've got a series of dams, and all of those reservoirs are way below capacity. Even with a couple of good years, Lake Mead is still low. So there's a lot of places to store water along Lake Havasu is another one. There's a bunch of places to store water. Yeah, and then divert it down into the Colorado River Delta. The Colorado River Delta is mostly dry, but Audubon has worked with partners on the last several years on actually getting water all the way through to Mexico. And it's incredible to see the original bed of the Colorado River with water flowing in it again. And the communities just come out in droves, and they're all, you know, jumping around in the water, and vegetation's being planted along the river in Mexico. So some water is getting back down there. But yeah, I would assume there's good infrastructure in place to move the water around as necessary.
But that infrastructure did not exist
That,
120 years
No.
ago. And it was water coming down the Colorado River. The Hoover Dam hadn't been built
Yep.
yet. There's an excellent story by Michael Hiltzik. He's actually a local guy, publishes a column mostly on business twice a week. And the book is entitled Colossus. And he starts talking off about right there in before the Salton Sea was created from this big deluge. Somebody screwed up on the pipes and everything, and it was coming down the Colorado River. Really interesting. They talked about the 7 states involved in the Colorado River water. Arizona was like, we don't need you guys. And so now they're on the losing end of this story.
they are.
Really fun. Hiltzik does a lot of very interesting novels based on, you know, our local history.
Huh,
So
that's a
they're
good
not
tip.
Like me, I enjoy reading this book.
Yeah, water in the West is very complicated. Any other questions?
The water coming into the lower Colorado from the Gulf of Cortez. Why don't we just let the whole pipeline of water go into the sea? Because below sea level, you don't have to use any energy to pump it. And obviously it's a virtually infinite amount of water. So you'd never have to worry about dust and any of that.
Yeah, well, the problem is it all gets diverted before it even gets there. Because it's going here, it's going to Los Angeles, it's going,
I'm trying to say Cortez, saltwater.
Cortez,
pumping it.
Downhill to the Salton Sea.
Right, okay, sorry, I
And that's
misunderstood.
because Guy McCaskey, who's
Yes,
expert on birds, is also a civil engineer, and he said it's not only the easiest, it's the cheapest. But it's the idea that you can flood the entire lake bed and control this height of it, so you can have those resorts again.
yeah, so there is a group, and UC Santa Cruz was actually the hired group to do a study on what they call this C2C proposal, which is building a new canal and aqueduct from the Sea of Cortez and piping water back to the Salton Sea. Yeah, I wouldn't say we're opposing the project, but we're not supporting it. A few reasons. One is it's still a big engineering thing that would have to happen over a very long stretch to get water from the Sea of Cortez to the Salton Sea. We're taking water from Mexico. We've taken most of the Colorado River. We're taking water back again from Mexico from the Sea of Cortez and we've already prevented, most of the Colorado River water even getting to Mexico. So Mexico would have to agree to this. It goes through a lot of tribal lands in Mexico, and it would be incredibly expensive. Yeah, I think, to me, the solution is, let's deal with it where it is, there at the Salton Sea versus creating another situation. Different people have different opinions on it. Again, I'm not completely opposed to it, but I just don't think it's the best course of action. And the UC Santa Cruz report basically said that it's cost and prohibitive, and the engineering involved also make it fairly prohibitive to create a whole new canal system. It's with the UC Santa Cruz. They were hired. The state put out a bid for any company or firm or university to do a study on whether this is feasible. And this lab at UC Santa Cruz was chosen to do the study, and it's online. You can access it and read about it. No, it was last year or 2 years ago. It was in the last 1 to 2 years. It was very recent because it was some of the communities around the sea are interested in this proposal. So they started asking the state to look into this alternative. So the state agreed to invest money into, finding a group that could do a thorough analysis. And yeah, so that study was just completed. It was in the news, and you can look up the research. So yeah, it's right, exactly. Any other questions?
Well,
All
we
right,
need to
thank
get
you.
Staff going home, so I think we'll call it here, but thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming. Hope to see you again.